For the first time in our brief conscious history, humanity looked to the sky not with fear, but with calculated confidence. We left behind the era of being mere passive spectators of the cosmic ballet, vulnerable to any errant rock that decided to cross our path. We entered the era of planetary defense, a global network of telescopes, silent sentinels, scans the darkness day and night, cataloging every near-Earth object, calculating their orbits decades in advance. Supercomputers in E. Climate-controlled data centers hum with the task of predicting collisions, transforming the chaos of the cosmos into manageable probabilities. This infrastructure, coordinated by offices like NASA's, represents more than technology. It is a shield forged by our ingenuity, a declaration that we would not suffer the same fate as the dinosaurs. We had a plan. For the smaller objects, we had warning systems. For the larger ones, the city killers, or civilization killers, we had weapons. The idea was no longer science fiction, but a budgeted and tested reality. The sense of security was palpable, a civilizational achievement that allowed us to focus on our earthly problems, believing that the existential threat from space was, if not resolved, at least under control. We were a species that had finally learned to defend itself. This illusion of control, this comforting narrative of a humanity that had mastered its environment, was what made the ensuing revelation so profoundly shattering. We were about to discover that the shield we had so proudly constructed was as fragile as a sheet of paper in the face of a forest fire, and that our newfound security was merely the silence before the storm. The tranquility was shattered not by an explosion in the sky, but by the quiet click of a file being uploaded to an anonymous server. The news didn't make headlines in major newspapers, but as a whisper in intelligence forums and niche scientific communities. A document marked Classified Planetary Threat Assessment began to circulate. Its title was bureaucratic, almost mundane. Mitigation Capability Assessment. Object 3I Atlas. The seal of NASA's Office of Planetary Defense was at the top. Initially, many dismissed it as a well-crafted hoax. But then experts began analyzing the telemetry, the simulation models, the theoretical physics contained within its pages. It was real. The report wasn't a contingency plan. It was an autopsy. The autopsy of a catastrophic failure. Before the battle even began, the document detailed a series of digital warfare simulations, virtual tests of our entire defense arsenal against a single anomalous object. 3I Atlas. The language was cold, clinical, and devoid of emotion, but the conclusions emerging from its tables and graphs were a silent cry of terror. The leak exposed a truth that the world's governments had apparently been trying to hide, that our trust was dangerously misplaced. That, out there, moving silently toward our solar system, was something that challenged not only our weapons, but our very understanding of the laws of the universe. The question hanging in the air, more frightening than the report's contents itself, was, why now? Who would leak such a demoralizing document, and for what purpose? Was it a warning, an attempt to force the authorities' hand, or something far more sinister? To understand the depth of the shock contained in that report, we must first appreciate the pinnacle of our triumph. The DART mission, or Double Asteroid Redirection Test, was not just an experiment. It was the first time humanity reached out and deliberately altered the cosmos. Launched by NASA, the DART spacecraft was, in essence, a 600-kilogram smart cannonball. Its target was Dimorphos, a small asteroid moon orbiting a larger asteroid called Didymos, millions of kilometers from Earth. The mission was simple in concept and incredibly complex in execution. Hit Dimorphos with precision to see if the kinetic impact could alter its orbit. For months, the world watched as DART traveled through the void. Then, on September 26, 2022, the final images began arriving. With each second, the rocky, rugged surface of Dimorphos grew larger, more detailed, until the transmission abruptly cut off at the instant of impact. The silence in the control room was followed by an explosion of applause and relief. Days later, telescopes on Earth confirmed the impossible. The impact had been a resounding success, altering Dimorphos's orbital period by 32 minutes, far more than the minimum expected. We had done it. We had a functional planetary weapon. The kinetic impactor was our first sword, a proof of concept that validated decades of theory. Humanity now possessed the power to push a dangerous asteroid, diverting it from a collision course, provided we had enough time. DART was the foundation of our confidence, the factual anchor that made us believe we were safe. DART's success was proof of our first method of defense, the brute force of kinetic impact. But Earth's arsenal wasn't limited to that. Scientists at the Office of Planetary Defense knew that flexibility was key to survival, so they developed and studied a range of other technologies. Among the most promising was the use of high-powered lasers. The idea, known as laser ablation, was brutally elegant. Instead of pushing the asteroid, a powerful laser beam, perhaps positioned on a satellite, would be focused on a single point on its surface. The intense energy would instantly vaporize the rock, creating a jet of gas and debris that would shoot out into space. By Newton's third law, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This jet of ejected material would act like a tiny, continuous rocket engine, gently nudging the asteroid off its original course. It was a surgical approach in contrast to DART's sledgehammer. Besides lasers, other ideas, such as the gravity tractor, were in advanced theoretical stages. This would involve parking a massive spacecraft near the asteroid for an extended period. The mutual gravitational pull, though minuscule, would be enough to pull the asteroid into a safe orbit over months or years. And, of course, there was the nuclear option, the controversial last resort of detonating a nuclear device at a safe distance to irradiate and vaporize the asteroid's surface, providing a powerful boost. This was our arsenal, a diverse and intelligent toolkit designed by some of the brightest minds on the planet. We had the strength, the precision, and the patience. We were prepared. It was precisely this preparation, this confidence in our multifaceted arsenal, that made the simulations described in the leaked report so terrifying. Scientists at the Planetary Defense Office were testing 3I Atlas not against a single defense, but against all of them, in digital warfare scenarios run by the world's most powerful supercomputers. The first simulation modeled a kinetic impactor, an enhanced and more massive version of DART. The report described the visualization. The projectile traveling at over 20,000 kilometers per hour on a perfect trajectory for impact. In the final moments, just a few kilometers from the target, the simulation data became anomalous. The impactor, instead of colliding, simply disappeared. Its energy signature, its mass, its velocity, everything went to zero an instant before contact. There was no explosion, no fragments, not the slightest change in 3I Atlas's trajectory. It was as if a stone had been dropped into a pond and, instead of creating ripples, simply ceased to exist in midair. The next simulation tested laser ablation. A set of high-energy beams, powerful enough to cut through steel like butter, was focused on the object. Instead of the expected plume of vaporized rock, the virtual sensors showed the light either perfectly reflected, as if striking a flawless mirror, or subtly bent around the object, continuing its journey through space without releasing a single joule of its energy. The preliminary conclusion, scrawled in the report notes, was one of sheer perplexity. The laws of conservation of momentum and energy appeared to be violated in the object's immediate vicinity. Our weapons, based on these fundamental laws, were useless. The question that plagued the scientists who wrote the report was why? How could an object simply ignore the fundamental laws of physics? The answer, or the most plausible theory they could formulate, formed the speculative and terrifying heart of the document. The bridge to this speculation was built on a foundation of advanced theoretical physics. Their conclusion was that 3I Atlas did not possess an energy shield in the traditional sense, like a force field that absorbs or repels attacks. What it was generating was something far more fundamental and incomprehensible. The theory proposed in the report was that the object was generating a localized and intense distortion of space-time itself. To use an analogy, if space-time is a stretched rubber sheet, most objects, such as planets and stars, create a small depression in it, what we call gravity. 3I Atlas, however, seemed capable of creating a sharp and temporary whirlwind or fold in this rubber sheet in its immediate vicinity. An approaching impactor wasn't hitting a wall. It was flying into a region where the very fabric of space it was passing through became unstable and contorted. The projectile was effectively disassembled at a fundamental level, not by an external force, but because the rules of its existence ceased to apply at that point. Similarly, the laser's photons, following the geodesics of space-time, simply followed the extreme curvature and were deflected, unable to reach the surface. The shield wasn't a barrier over the object. The shield was the object itself, rewriting physics locally to protect itself. After dozens of pages filled with data indecipherable, to the layman, failed simulations, and theories bordering on science fiction, the report reached its conclusion. It was a single, nearly empty page containing a paragraph that summed up the full horror of the discovery. There was no complex jargon or deliberate equivocation. It was a final statement, a confession of absolute impotence couched in the cold, unequivocal language of science. The quote, which has since become the epicenter of all debate and panic, read, "After exhausting all simulated models based on currently understood kinetic, electromagnetic, and gravitational principles, it is the conclusive and unanimous assessment of this office that none of our current or future weapons under development can demonstrably penetrate or affect the anomalous shield exhibited by 3I Atlas." Every word seemed to have been chosen to maximize the weight of defeat. Conclusive and unanimous eliminated any hope that a dissenting scientist might have an alternative solution. Near the same future crushed the idea that we could simply invent a new technology in time. Demonstrably was an admission that in every scenario tested, the outcome was zero. This wasn't an assessment of a challenge to be overcome. It was the death certificate of our defense capability. The same men and women who designed and celebrated the success of DART were now, in their own words, admitting that they had encountered a problem for which they not only had no solution, but couldn't even conceive of one. The direct implication of this conclusion was as simple as it was overwhelming. We were completely, utterly, and irrevocably defenseless. The metaphor that began to circulate among those analyzing the leaked report was that we were like Bronze Age archers facing a modern tank. And even that analogy seemed inadequate. An archer, at least, understands the concept of metal armor. He can see that his arrows ricochet. What the NASA report described was a much deeper situation. Our arrows weren't ricocheting. They were vanishing into thin air. The tank wasn't blocking our attacks. It was operating on a level of reality that rendered our attacks irrelevant. All our technology, from controlled fire to fusion reactors, operates within a set of physical rules that we consider universal. 3I Atlas seemed capable of ignoring those rules. This meant that our most advanced defense system, the culmination of centuries of scientific progress, was fundamentally obsolete. The pride we'd felt in the DART mission now seemed like a dangerous naivete. We celebrated our ability to move a pebble, unaware that a mountain impervious to all our tools was coming our way. The sense of security we'd carefully built crumbled, revealing an abyss of vulnerability that had always been there, just waiting to be exposed. We weren't just outmatched. We were in a different league, a lesser life form confronting something for which we had no reference. The realization of our technological impotence forced a much more profound shift in perspective, a philosophical extrapolation about our true place in the cosmos. Throughout our history, we have operated under the often unspoken assumption that we are the measure of all things. Even when we looked to the stars, we did so with a kind of arrogance, searching for life that might resemble us, imagining galactic empires based on our own image. 3I Atlas and the NASA report shattered this anthropocentric view. It forced us to confront the possibility that we are not an advanced civilization, but rather a technologically primitive one, perhaps at the lowest rung of the cosmic scale. We are the isolated tribe on the island, who spent centuries perfecting the spear, only to see a nuclear aircraft carrier loom on the horizon. The technological gap is not just quantitative, it is qualitative. It is so vast that communication may be impossible, understanding unattainable. The report demoted us. We were no longer the masters of our small corner of the galaxy. We were tenants, perhaps even microbial life forms, in a cosmic petri dish, suddenly aware that the scientist watching us is about to introduce a new variable. This cosmic humiliation is perhaps more terrifying than the physical threat. It is the realization that our intelligence, our culture, our history may be completely insignificant compared to the forces that truly govern the universe. And so, we come to the final question, the one the NASA report leaves open, hanging over humanity's future like a guillotine blade. If resistance is futile, if fighting is impossible, what is our only option? The paradigm of planetary defense, based on conflict and mitigation, has disintegrated. Should we then shift to a paradigm of contact? The first option would be to attempt communication. But how do we communicate with something that distorts space-time? What kind of message would we send? Sequences of prime numbers and diagrams of the hydrogen atom? The clichés of our past attempts seem pathetically inadequate. We would be trying to teach the alphabet to an entity that writes in three-dimensional poetry. Another, darker option would be surrender. But how do we surrender to a force that has made no demands, that has shown no sign of hostility, or even awareness of our existence? Surrender to what? To the inevitable? Or the third, and perhaps most likely, option is simply to wait, watching 3I Atlas continue on its path, while our best minds desperately try to understand what it is, and hoping that its intentions are peaceful, or more likely, that it simply has no intentions toward us, that we are so insignificant that it will pass us by like a cargo ship passes a patch of plankton in the ocean without even noticing. The choice between attempting an impossible communication, offering a meaningless surrender, or surrendering to passive and terrifying waiting is the legacy of NASA's shocking report. The fight is over before it began, and now all that remains is to decide how to meet our end.